Kia ora koutou. I'm Colin McLeod from Dunedin, New Zealand. I'm the Director for the National Centre of Religious Studies. Over here I look after religious education for all New Zealand primary and secondary schools. It's my privilege to have an opportunity to speak to you about an area that I am studying at the moment, which is the relationship between parish and parish school. I don't have a lot of answers at this stage, but I've got a number of questions and a few insights that have come from the literature. So hopefully this helps your little grey cells, as Pyro would say, leap into action and have a little bit of a think before we come together. I also want to signal that it's likely that I'll be teaching my grandmother to suck eggs and some of these pieces of information that I share. But hopefully it does give you some food for thought. I've titled this session, Where Do the Children Go? Not just because we're only talking about children. Obviously, we're talking about adults and families that belong to parish and school. But I've often been challenged by the fact that many young people come through our Catholic schools and do have a really rich, deep spirituality. They are searching for something, but for some reason they don't find it in the parish. And often the school becomes their place of focus for faith. And what happens when they leave the school? They need somewhere to go. The parish needs to be a centre for young people to feel that they are connected and that they belong and that they can return to. So I thought I would begin by just introducing you to my parish. This is St. Bridget's Parish in Dunedin, New Zealand. And this building has now been bulldozed and knocked down. 4 parishes came together about 4 years ago, and we lost our church and we gained a wonderful centre. When we were focusing on the coming together, we decided not to look at all at loss in terms of losing our churches. It's not that there wasn't loss, of course there was, but we decided to focus on what could be gained. This little image of this lovely little girl here who's brought Jessie the giraffe from school. She's only been at school for 3 days. Her principal's standing there in the background. She's with her mum. She's engaged. She's actually reading the diocesan news. I often say to teachers, now if you can get young kids reading the diocesan news only 5 days into Catholic education, then you're doing a good job. If she were to look over the top of that magazine, this is what she would see. And when we remodeled an old basilica, over 100 years old, we decided that our community wanted to be outward looking and we wanted that to be visible. And so we put these great big huge windows in where there used to be a choir loft and a big, fairly ugly foyer. And we built somewhere else a place where we could have a cup of tea. And so we are literally outward looking, and the priests have said a couple of times that it's really interesting when Mass is going on that people will pause walking past the street and looking in. Surely this is what we want our parishes to be, places that people are interested in, that they want to connect with. We're blessed with a wonderful priest, Gerard Ainsley, and what he will do from time to time is gather the children around the altar. I think one of the disconnects that can happen between school and parish is that the sense of welcome isn't present from either side. And I think this is a mistake in our church. It's something that the literature highlights, a kind of parallel play. In early childhood, there's such a thing as parallel play, which means usually that a couple of kids are playing next to each other. They might have the same toys, they might be engaged in very similar activities, but they don't really make any eye contact. They're not really working together, though they are conscious of the presence of each other, but they're parallel playing. I believe that schools and parishes often really richly parallel play, and that the opportunity for coming together is lost and can be as simple as gathering the young people around the altar. The other family that I connected with for many years was Kavanagh College. For 22 years I was an assistant principal and the director for religious studies, and I love this photo of, it's the end of Caritas Challenge. In fact, it's just after reconciliation where the young people sort of gathered for a photo. Most of them have been up to reconciliation. Many of whom, I believe, probably aren't even Catholic, but still went to reconciliation. And they gather with a spirit of joy. They're focused on social justice. They have a really rich understanding of wanting to be better people in the world. And this photo captures the fact that they do this as part of being the church, but I'm not sure that they always feel. I mean, we try to teach it in the schools, but that social justice is something that is responding to a call from Jesus. There's places that we can work more richly in terms of parish and schools, sharing social justice projects and social justice encounters with one another. And this is my office. This is where I work in Dunedin. Now, if I were to look out of that window, Just by chance, I happen to be working now only a few metres away from the school that I taught at for 22 years. And it reminds me that the work that I do in religious education needs to be grounded in the reality of these young people, many of whom are not churched, many of whom have deep, profound, rich faiths, many of whom come from different cultures, who are deeply and profoundly connected with the Catholic Church. There's phenomenal diversity out there. And my job in terms of religious education and in terms of this research of saying, well, where does parish and school connect, is to see what possibilities might exist there and what might also be happening that's already wonderfully rich. There's a phrase in Māoridom, a whakatauki, which reads as, poipoia te kakano kia puawai, nurture the seed and it will blossom. I believe that at the core of our being as people who work in the Catholic Church, we have to believe that the work that we put in nurtures seeds that are planted not only by ourselves, but by families and those that have gone before us, and that we don't always see the fruits of that. So one of the ways that relationship between school and parish is often judged is by mass attendance. I believe this is a mistake. I certainly want our young people and families associated with schools to be connected with the parish in terms of gathering around the Eucharist. It's not by chance that it's referred to as the source and summit of Christian life. However, parish and school work much more deeply than just Sunday Mass. I think there are often areas that resonate with Catholic understanding and Catholic beliefs and Catholic practice where people have chosen not to commit to Sunday Mass, but they still live rich Catholic lives. And there's not a lot of literature which really focuses on how that might happen. One of the areas where the literature points to in terms of mass attendance is this reduction in religiosity. In actual fact, religious things are no longer as evident as they used to be. It's not as evident in the newspapers and news items on the television, and if it is, it's often in a negative context. Even the physical presence of churches is changing in our world. Similarly, arguably, a lack of vibrancy exists. I remember many years ago encouraging a young girl in a class to head along to Sunday Mass. And she did. Her parents were amazed. They met me at the door and they said, what did you say? And I said, look, just put it out there that you've got to participate in this Eucharist, not just sort of criticise from afar. And unfortunately, it was one of the most lacklustre masses I'd been to in a long time. This is a while ago. And the homily was dreadful. The music was terrible. All sorts of good people, perhaps without much energy left. And as we sort of left, I bumped into the same family again, and the dad looks at me and says, well, we won't be seeing you back here again. Jesus didn't preach a lackluster church. He preached one that was full of, or supposedly should be, full of energy, full of vibrancy. Somehow we have to capture that. And many of you will say, hey, that's not us. I completely understand that. I hope it's not the parish I'm part of now too. But it is one of the issues that people claim, or they state, in terms of not wanting to come to Mass. And definitely linked with this is a lack of joy. It's really interesting how often the word joy is mentioned in Eucharist. One time I actually counted it out, 13 times one Sunday Mass, the word joy was mentioned, and every single time it was said with a serious face, an arguably reverent face, but the sense of joy that the words contained wasn't conveyed by the person who was speaking them. When I'm a Eucharistic minister, I always try to smile at the person I'm giving communion to. You might not like that, but I think if we can't be joyful at the time that we're actually receiving Christ and we encounter one another as an extraordinary minister of Holy Communion and somebody receiving communion, surely there must be joy at least in that place. The other is a perceived lack of relevance, that young people and many older people and families just don't see the point of going to church. They think that they're picking up the main ideas of that church, so they may have a belief in God, that they can do this without needing to go along to Mass. That's part of our job. Relevance is a dangerous term for all sorts of reasons, but what they're really saying is that the Eucharist doesn't speak to them in their lives. And you and I know that that's not true, but what needs to happen is actively the message that we give needs to be improved so that the relevance is screamingly overt. Clearly, Pope Francis is actually working in this space at the moment. It does us no harm to try and model what he's up to. And finally, there's quite a strong sense that people aren't looking to actively belong. I believe this is quite different from their need to belong. Every human being has an innate desire to belong, to not be isolated and alone. But what's happening in society is that people are choosing not to belong. Rugby clubs, Lions clubs, music clubs, across the board, even libraries, people are making conscious decisions or unconscious decisions not to join up, not to actually participate, and going along to church or claiming a particular connection to a parish as part of that. Of course, schools are different in this regard because there is a very strong sense of belonging that schools engender and establish, partly because they're caring for the most precious people in parents' lives, their children. So there's a much more overt connection, particularly in primary school, although interestingly, that same desire to belong dissipates at secondary. Perhaps as kids get older, the parents feel that they've done their stash. So it's often harder to get parents to participate in working bees and camps and the likes at secondary school. So this has an impact on mass attendance, but it's not really talking to what mass is all about, but it certainly talks in the area of what do people experience when they come along to mass and why they might not. It's an area that we need to look at as people engaged in parish. Now, I don't want you to get depressed about this because I believe that there's real opportunity here. We need to be enthusiastic about what we do, and we need to not climb into the negative attitudes that often surround us, and not climb into the fact that it's such jolly hard work and that no one else seems to be doing it with us, because I think a lot of people are actually working in this space, often in ways that we don't recognise, from flower ladies to people that are planning incredible music extravaganzas as part of Sunday Mass. Many years ago, a Dominican sister shared with me in a lecture that we whisper what we say and we shout who we are. I've never forgotten it. It's something I quote again and again and again. If we are working in parish or school and our words don't resonate with what we do, if we're using phrases like joy and happiness and we have stern doer faces, then it's as though those words are whispered, tiny whispers, barely audible, because what we are doing is absolutely shouting who we are, which is in opposition to those words that we're speaking. I think the church often does this, and I believe it does it unconsciously. The flip side of the same coin is that if our words resonate with how we live our lives, then we're absolutely screaming out. That any person that's ever been a teacher understands this when they meet students that have come up to them in the past and go, oh, I loved being in your class, and I remember when you, and they mention something that's usually obliquely related to what was going on in the classroom, but it's either something we did, or it's a conversation in a playground, or it's something to do with a retreat or something along those lines. All the time we are whispering and or shouting. It's a phrase I believe that if we embed it in our actions, it helps call me to account again and again and again. Because what we're actually engaged in is evangelization. Now, the phrase new evangelization comes through in the literature again and again in looking at parish and school relationships. But it's something that we clearly haven't achieved. It's something that we are still working on. I love this image because what it calls us to do is to reflect on what the cheese is at our place. Why would someone choose to be engaged in your parish? Why would someone actually want to be there? What draws them? What is it that when they actually arrive or when they become part of that community, what is it that keeps them so focused that they want to come back again and again and again and claim that connection? I think it's worth pausing the video for a moment and just having a wee think about that. And the flip side of that coin is, why might people need to wear a crash helmet when they come to your place? What are the things that are not so good, that are not so negative, that actually makes them fearful? Now, it might not always be your fault. I'll tell you a true story. A number of years ago, my wife and I were coming to Mass, and we came in a side door. My wife's got a disability, so mobility is not great. And so we came in a door that's not used so much by the regular people. And look, our doors to our church look nothing like this one. They're much smaller, but they didn't have glass, so you couldn't see through them. And as we were walking in, we noticed that there was a woman there, a woman in her 30s, who was gently pushing the door open, just a tiny fraction, was sort of peering in. And then she saw us and she got a fright. And she sort of jumped out. She's, "Oh, am I allowed in?" And what we realised was that it was First Holy Communion Day. This was a mum who was coming. She was a little bit early. She was coming for her daughter's First Holy Communion. And she was looking to see, she had been a Catholic. We had a little bit of a yarn after Mass with her. And she said, she'd been a Catholic sort of a long time ago, but it'd been a long time since she'd been into a church, and she wasn't really sure whether she should be there or not. Now, if one of the most strongest, most profound messages emanating from our church, our physical parish, our own parish community, is not that you are welcome, then we're doing something seriously wrong. There's a major flaw in what we are doing if somebody doesn't even know if they are allowed in. Now, I'm sure this is not the case in your place, but it is in many places. And it's not because we've established it as such, it's because it's crept up on us, sort of a death of a thousand cuts. Many families, I believe, that come to our Catholic schools don't really feel welcomed by the parish. And I also know that schools can be quite exclusive in terms of making people feel, such as priests or other members of the community that may want to help participate in the school, that they also are not welcome for a range of reasons. The bottom line here is, if we're involved authentically in evangelization, we need to know that we're welcome and that we're welcoming others. I literally have this cartoon on the wall of my office. It grounds me every time. How wonderful is it for us to be actively working in co-creation, to be actively working in drawing people into parish life, into centering themselves on Christ? Because the reality is, this thing is only half-baked. It's not complete. It's not finished. What Jesus started, we still continue. So let's join ourselves in that action. And again, with a bit of joy and a bit of smile on our face, let's sort of pick up the reason that we're actually doing this work and see what we can do to actually help fan these flames into life. Look, a couple of points before we finish. Considering who our people are is really critical. This is a page from a document that my organisation wrote for primary religious education. And in a bridging document, we encouraged the teachers to sit down and work out exactly who are the people that are in their community. We know that there's great diversity, but it's a worthy exercise to actually sit down and write down who are the people who actually are part of our community. And I think people are often surprised. Again, you've probably already done this, but what we learn is that there are incredible opportunities to be able to tap into. And similarly with the school communities and the parish community, there's often an interrelated aspect. There's grandparents and families. Again, cultural aspects play a big part in this. Many cultures, they're turning up to Mass regularly, and it's the white Europeans perhaps that have drifted off. And again, that's not always the case. But the reality is that when we look at who's part of it, it provides an opportunity for a different type of invitation, for a different way of being. And despite the fact that people are choosing not to belong to a lot of organisations, we know that people are actually wanting to belong to something. And we offer something awesome in our parishes and in our Catholic schools. And the bottom line is that everybody is welcome, as long as we make them feel that way. I just wanted to use this little bit of data here from Graham Rossiter's book, Having Life to the Full, not Having Life to the Full, Life to the Full, which is put out in 2018, which is a collation of a range of research. And this is quite a useful little graph for showing us that the nature of our Catholic schools has changed too. Look, I'm really not interested in a blame game. It's very easy for parish to point the finger at the school and say, you're not doing your job properly. And it's very easy for a school to point their finger at the parish and say, you're not doing your job properly. You're not welcome. You don't provide anything that our young people want to connect to, and that we are now parish for our kids. All of this is flawed. The reality is that good people are doing good work and trying their best. But one of the realities in our schools, this is very similar in the New Zealand situation in terms of practicing Catholic, that there are less Catholics in our schools, that the lived Catholic experience is not as common as it once was. Look, the research that I've done in terms of readings, I haven't done any interviews or anything yet in terms of this, my personal focus on the relationship between parish and parish schools. But three things have emerged from the writings. One is we need to know our identity. Who are you? So not just as a parish, but as individuals, who are you? This links to this idea of knowing our people. And as a community, who do you claim to be? If somebody looks in from outside, who would they say you are? And if you're sitting next to somebody in a pew and you said, how would you describe our parish? You'd get so many different answers. It's worth spending time to work out who we actually are. What is our identity? Is it just ecclesial? Is it just pastoral? Is it social justice? Is it sacramental? How are these things combined? How are they separated? What things are missing in terms of our identity? What do we claim that actually isn't true? It's a worthy exercise. And it's so closely linked with what's your mission? What are you actually trying to achieve? What are we trying to achieve as a community? And where is this written down? A really interesting factor in modern times is that schools have a very clear mission usually. They have mission statements that actually mean something because they tend to be assessed at the end of the year or a period of time. Whereas parish often, probably not in your case, but parish often don't have a particularly written mission. There's something nebulous about we come together for Christ, we come together to build community. We can use a lot of phrases, but how does somebody who is joining the community or stepping in from the outside, or someone who's been part of this community for decades, how do they have a common sense of mission? And the last point, who's leading? And how do we know? Because often leadership takes place in areas that we're not expecting. And often leadership has been happening for years in small pockets with incredible impact with people who don't even have a title. And sometimes those that do have the titles are in the place aren't actually the best people to be doing that particular type of leading. And if leadership is strong and vibrant in the community, things happen. So in terms of the relationship between school and parish, shared identity, shared mission, shared understandings around leadership make a huge difference. We'll talk more about that in the webinar. Finally, I just want to leave you with one little story. About 20 years ago, my wife and I were in a supermarket, and it just happened to be benefit day. And there were a lot of people who seemed to have fairly low means. And Jan and I, it was school holidays, so we'd filled up our supermarket with just anything that we actually wanted, and realized that a lot of other people's trolleys weren't anywhere near as full as ours and had a lot more no label sorts of brands. It was embarrassing. I was walking around and we almost wanted to just get out of there and come back, because we realized how blessed we were in comparison to some others. Anyway, we arrive at the checkout and our trolley's full. And there was a guy next to, just behind us, who just had a little basket with 3 items in. He had a ripped jersey. He looked pretty down on his luck. And I said to him, look, go in front of us. We're going to be ages. And he goes, no, it's all right. And I said, no, please, you go in front of us, because you'll just be quick. And he goes, oh, thanks very much. And as he was scanning his few items through, he reached across for a Crunchy bar, which was on sale, 99 cents. And I can remember thinking, oh, isn't that great that he's getting a Crunchy bar? Poor fella, he probably hasn't got much going on in his life, and he's going to treat himself to that Crunchy bar. And isn't it nice of me to have, I'm not saying this out loud, of course, isn't it nice of me to have let him in? And, we're lucky, me and Jan. And anyway, as I'm doing this and loading up the conveyor belt with our own stuff, I feel a tap on my arm, and it's this guy, and he's tapped my shoulder and he's passing me the Crunchy bar. He says, thanks very much for letting me in, mate. Every ounce of my being wanted to say no. No, thank you. You keep the Crunchy bar. It's not me. I mean, I'd created this completely invented scenario in my head of me in a position of power, being a kind person. And what this person had done is exactly what Christ does all the time. Had completely turned the tables to an encounter of one human being with another. And so in my head, the voice was, take the flipping Crunchy bar, you arrogant sod. And I did, and I smiled at him and I said, thank you. And off he went. And we got their groceries and got back to the car. And Jan was sitting in the passenger seat next to me, and I took the crunchy bar out and I broke it in half, and I passed half to Jan and I said, "The body of Christ." It was. It can be as easy as that. That there are big things going on, but if we focus on the big things, we fail to see the moments when Christ enters our world, touches our lives, and shows us new ways of being. In terms of parish and parish school, the reality is that people are working really, really hard in their own spaces to nurture the seed so that it will blossom. But there's another reality that can come into play if there's the right energies and the right opportunities, the right people, where rich conversations can take place that I believe will help bridge that gap between parish and parish school, so that we start working more together, using the resources that we have together to build community, that I think would give a wonderful richness to our church. Thank you. Hopefully I haven't put you off. Might see you at the webinar.